Crazy Horse, a name that isn't just a legend in Native American history, but a symbol of resilience, defiance, and the unwavering spirit of the Lakota people. When we think of the greatest warriors in Native history, certain names immediately come to mind: Red Cloud, Sitting Bull, Black Elk, and of course, Crazy Horse, the fearless warrior who became an icon in the fight against U.S. expansion in the late 19th century. Of course, the legacy of Native American history extends far beyond the Lakota. Names like Squanto, Pocahontas, and Sacagawea are widely known, figures who played key roles in moments of contact and adaptation with European settlers. The Lakota stand out, not just because of their victories on the battlefield, but because of their unwavering resistance, their determination to protect their land, and their refusal to let their culture be erased. So why does Crazy Horse stand out among them all? Is it simply his reputation as a warrior? Or is it the power of his name, a name that evokes strength, mystery, and an unbreakable spirit? No doubt, Crazy Horse would have made history regardless of his name, but it's undeniable that his name alone carries weight, setting the tone for who he was, a leader who never sought personal glory, a fighter who put his people before himself. Today, I want to tell you the story of Crazy Horse, a story that is more than just history. It is the legacy of a people. Crazy Horse, a name that carries power, mystery, and an undeniable presence in Native American history. But have you ever wondered how he earned that name? Among the Lakota, the act of receiving a new name wasn't just a simple change. It was a deeply meaningful tradition, a reflection of one's journey through life. In Lakota culture, it was common for a person to be given a different name as they grew older. A child might start life with one name, but through acts of bravery, wisdom, or personal transformation, they could earn a new one that truly reflected who they had become. This wasn't just a name change, it was a rite of passage, a mark of honor and recognition within the tribe. For Crazy Horse, his journey to earning his legendary name was filled with trials, battles, and visions, each step shaping him into the leader and warrior we remember today. His story is not just about war, but about identity, spirit, and the deep traditions of his people. Let's dive into how Crazy Horse became more than just a man, how he became a legend. The exact birth year of Crazy Horse is something of a mystery. Historical records place it somewhere between 1840 and 1842, but the Lakota didn't track birth dates the way European settlers did. Instead, they often remembered births based on significant events happening at the time. And in this case, the only recorded event around that period. A great horse raid, one where Lakota warriors stole a large number of horses, an act of defiance and power that, in many ways, foreshadowed the kind of warrior Crazy Horse would become. At birth, he was given the name Among the Trees, a peaceful, natural name that reflected his early years. But as he grew, something set him apart, his unusually light-colored hair and skin, a rare trait among Lakota men. Because of this, his mother began calling him Light Hair or Curly, and the name stuck. Some might have seen this as a reason for him to be teased or stand out in a way that made him uncomfortable. But his mother, wise and strong, did something remarkable. She owned it before anyone else could use it against him. By openly acknowledging his unique appearance, she gave him the strength to embrace it. And from a young age, Lighthair learned that his identity would not be defined by how others saw him, but by the warrior he would become. Many historical accounts referred to him as Curly rather than Lighthair. One of the most respected sources on his life is The Journey of Crazy Horse by Joseph M. Marshall III, a Lakota historian who provides an intimate perspective on his people's history. Given his deep connection to the Lakota, his insights carry immense weight. Tragically, Lighthair's mother passed away when he was just 4 years old, a devastating loss for any child. However, in Lakota culture, family extended beyond just one mother and father. His father eventually remarried, and since polygamy was not uncommon among the Lakota, Lighthair gained new maternal figures who helped raise him. Lighthair's father was not a warrior in the traditional sense. He was a medicine man, a spiritual guide and healer among his people. And his name, Crazy Horse, this wasn't just a name, it was a legacy. His father before him had also carried the name Crazy Horse, making it a title passed down through generations, much like how European families had surnames like Johnson or Smith. But unlike European names, Crazy Horse wasn't inherited by birth, it had to be earned. While his father focused on healing, Lighthair's path would be different. He was born to be a warrior. Even at just 4 years old, he was given his first bow, and his natural talent quickly became clear. By the time he turned 12, he was already an expert hunter, a skill that wasn't just about survival, but a rite of passage for young Lakota men. Among the Lakota, mastery of the bow and horseback riding was second nature. From childhood, their games and training revolved around these skills, ensuring that by the time they reached adulthood, they were already formidable warriors. For Lighthair, shooting an arrow through a rolling hoop was just the beginning. Soon, he was refining his aim on even smaller, more challenging targets, like grasshoppers in the fields. Precision, patience, and practice, these were the early lessons that would shape him into the legendary warrior we know today. As a young boy, Lighthair, the boy who would later become Crazy Horse, wasn't just learning how to survive. He was learning how to fight, how to lead, and how to embrace the warrior spirit of the Lakota. One of his closest childhood friends was Lone Bear, and together, they played the same kinds of games that generations of Lakota boys had played before them. Games that weren't just for fun, but for survival and battle. One of their favorite games was called Knocking Them Off Horses, which was exactly what it sounds like. Two boys on horseback would ride against each other, trying to knock the other one off. It wasn't just about strength, it was about balance, reaction time, and the ability to stay mounted even under pressure. Skills like these would one day be crucial in battle. But the most important game of all, buffalo chase. In this game, one boy would take off on horseback, playing the role of a mighty buffalo. Another would give chase, representing a hunter, his mission to land a hit using a blunted arrow. This wasn't just child's play, this was a rite of passage, a way for young Lakota warriors to perfect their aim, their reflexes, and their ability to track and take down an enemy in full gallop. And let's be honest, Lakota boys probably bled a lot. These weren't the kinds of games where you could afford to be careless. Mistakes had consequences. You had to trust the person you were playing with, because if someone grabbed the wrong arrow, the kind meant for real hunting rather than training, the difference between practice and tragedy could be one heartbeat. But for Lighthair and his friends, this was more than just sport. This was preparation for war. The skills they sharpened as children would one day define them as warriors, as protectors of their people. And for one boy in particular, it would set him on the path to becoming one of the greatest warriors the Lakota had ever known. Every great warrior needs a mentor, someone who sees their potential before the world does, someone who guides them on the path to becoming something greater. For Lighthair, that mentor was High Backbone, better known as Hump. Hump wasn't just any warrior, he was a war chief, a leader among the Lakota, and someone deeply respected for his skills and bravery. While there aren't many surviving images of him, what we do know is that he was one of the greatest warriors of his time. His name likely came from the hump of a buffalo, a sacred and powerful symbol in Lakota culture, representing strength, resilience, and survival. But more than that, Hump was family. He was likely Lighthair's uncle, the brother of his deceased mother. And after her passing, he took the boy under his wing, guiding him not just in the ways of war, but in the discipline and mindset of a true Lakota warrior. There was something about Lighthair that Hump recognized, something different. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't the most aggressive, but he carried a quiet intensity, a deep sense of purpose. The famous Lakota medicine man Black Elk later spoke of their relationship, saying, "Hump was a very great warrior, maybe the greatest we ever had until then. They say people used to wonder at the boy and the old man always being together. But I think Hump knew Crazy Horse would be a great man and wanted to teach him everything." And Hump wasn't the only one who saw it. Lighthair's closest friends, He-Dog and Lone Bear, followed him wherever he went. He didn't command them, didn't tell them what to do, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made them trust him. As Joseph M. Marshall III described in The Journey of Crazy Horse, Lighthair wasn't always the fastest, the strongest, or the best shot, but what set him apart was that he never stopped trying. He had an instinct for leadership, an ability to read the land, to see the best path forward, not just in games, but in life. And one day that same instinct would make him one of the greatest war leaders in Lakota history. In 1854, a single wandering cow would set off a chain reaction that would forever alter the course of Lakota history. What might have seemed like a trivial incident to outsiders would soon escalate into a full-blown conflict, one that would ignite decades of war between the Lakota and the United States. At the time, Lighthair, the young boy who would later be known as Crazy Horse, was still growing into his role among the Lakota. He was Oglala Lakota, but the event that sparked the conflict took place among their neighbors, the Brule Lakota. It all began when a white settler's cow wandered into a Lakota camp. The Lakota, seeing an unattended animal, did what they had done for generations when hunting. They killed it for food. To them, this was a practical decision, not an act of hostility. But to the settlers and the U.S. Army stationed at Fort Laramie, this was seen as theft, and they demanded that the cow killer be punished. In an attempt to avoid conflict, Chief Conquering Bear, a respected leader of the Brule, offered a peaceful solution. He was willing to give the settlers 2 horses as compensation for the cow. A reasonable offer by any standard, especially considering how settlers frequently encroached upon Lakota land without consequence. But Lieutenant John Grattan, the U.S. officer leading the negotiations, refused the offer. To make matters worse, his translator was heavily drunk and reportedly harbored deep hatred for the Lakota. It's highly likely that he mistranslated key parts of the discussion, twisting words and fueling distrust. As tensions mounted, negotiations collapsed, and Grattan's men opened fire, fatally wounding Conquering Bear. The Lakota, seeing their chief fall, retaliated immediately. Within moments, the outnumbered 30 U.S. soldiers were wiped out. None survived to report back to Fort Laramie. This event, later called the Grattan Massacre, was more than just a skirmish. It was the spark that ignited nearly 25 years of war between the Lakota and the United States. Among those present that day were warriors from the Oglala Lakota who had come to support their Brule relatives. Lighthair was among them. While still too young to fight, he stood and watched, a silent observer of a moment that would shape his future. In Black Elk Speaks, it is said that young Lakota boys often watched battles unfold, absorbing the warrior culture from a young age. In some cases, children would even run onto the battlefield after a fight, taking part in an old tradition, counting coup. This act involved being the first to touch a fallen enemy, a mark of honor, proving one's bravery. Some even took scalps, bringing them home as trophies to earn the respect of their families. At this stage in his life, Lighthair was still a boy, but what he saw that day would stay with him forever. He was witnessing the beginning of something far greater than himself, the first battle in a long and brutal war. And as history would show, he would not remain an observer for long. The Lakota had faced broken treaties and relentless expansion, but in 1855, the violence escalated to a level that could never be forgotten. Gold had been discovered in the West, and Manifest Destiny was in full force. The U.S. government saw the land as theirs for the taking, regardless of who had lived there for generations. But for Crazy Horse, still known as Lighthair at the time, this was the moment when he would begin to understand the full weight of what was coming. And for the Lakota, the horror of what happened next would be etched into their memory forever. In response to the Grattan Massacre, the U.S. government sent General William Harney into Lakota territory, demanding that those responsible for the incident be turned over. But the Lakota refused. They had been attacked first, and they weren't about to hand over their warriors to be executed by the U.S. Army. Most of the Lakota men were away on a hunt when Harney and his troops arrived, and what followed was not a battle, it was a massacre. Over 80 Lakota were slaughtered, many of them women and children. Another 70 were taken prisoner, and those who were left behind were not simply killed, they were mutilated in ways that shocked even hardened warriors. Bodies were desecrated, scalps taken, not just from heads, but in the most horrific ways imaginable. General Harney would forever be known to the Lakota as woman killer or butcher. Lighthair was one of the first to arrive at the scene. Even before he reached the remains of his people, he already knew what had happened. Military horses wore metal shoes, leaving tracks that even the youngest Lakota boy could recognize. But as he followed the trail, he was forced to abandon his tracking because he found something else. A Tsitsistas Cheyenne woman, badly injured, struggling to survive. Her husband and child had just been murdered by the soldiers. She had no one left. Without hesitation, Light Hair carried her to safety, bringing her to the camp of Spotted Tail, a respected Brule Lakota leader. He never spoke of what he did that day. He never sought recognition, but word spread among his people. And for those who heard the story, it wasn't just his bravery they respected, it was his compassion. This was a defining moment for Light Hair. He was no longer just a boy playing warrior games. He had seen the full brutality of the U.S. Army, and he had made a choice, not to run, not to hide, but to protect those who could not protect themselves. And in the years to come, he would do it again. The massacre at Ash Hollow had changed Light Hair. He no longer saw the world through the eyes of a boy. The brutality of what he had witnessed, the slaughter of women and children, the mutilation of his people, had left its mark. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, and those around him began to notice his patience for the Americans was wearing thin. The events of 1855 weren't just an attack on his people. They were a warning, a sign that the world he had known was beginning to unravel. And soon he would be called to walk a different path. For the Lakota, the journey to becoming a warrior was more than just physical training. It was also a spiritual transformation. And part of that transformation came through a sacred tradition known as the Vision Quest. This wasn't something taken lightly. It was a deeply personal and sacred ritual where a young Lakota warrior would fast, isolate himself in nature, and pray for guidance. For Light Hair, the time had come. Alone, he made his way to a sandstone bluff, where he would remain for 2 days and nights, seeking a vision that would guide his future. And what he saw would change everything. In his vision, lightning struck his face, leaving a mark that seemed to glow with energy. Blue hailstones appeared on his chest, symbols of power and resilience. Behind him, storm clouds rolled in, flashing with thunder and lightning, a sign of the great battles that lay ahead. Then a red-tailed hawk soared above him, a sacred symbol among the Lakota, known for its keen sight and unbreakable spirit. Around him, bullets and arrows filled the air, but none touched him. No weapon could harm him. But before the vision ended, he saw something else. His own people, rising from the earth, pulling him down from his horse. It was a warning. This vision was not just a glimpse into his future. It was a prophecy. It told him that he would be protected in battle, that he would become a warrior unlike any other. But it also carried a darker message. His greatest danger would not come from his enemies, but from within his own people. This was the moment Light Hair truly became Crazy Horse, the warrior, the protector, the leader who would one day rise to challenge an empire. The vision of Light Hair, soon to be Crazy Horse, wasn't just personal. It was something felt by those around him. His father, Elder Crazy Horse, immediately understood what it meant. His son wasn't just any warrior, he was a thunder dreamer. But what exactly is a thunder dreamer? In Lakota tradition, a thunder dreamer was not an ordinary person. These individuals were believed to be touched by the spirits, granted visions and power beyond the physical world. But there was a catch. They had to walk a different path. Thunder dreamers were often described as contrarians, doing the opposite of what was expected. They weren't like other warriors who boasted about their victories or sought out praise. They lived humbly, never drawing attention to themselves, and because of this, they earned deep respect from their people. In Black Elk Speaks, Crazy Horse as an adult is described as an unusual man, someone who didn't behave like others. The book says he would go about the village without noticing people or saying anything. In his own tipi, he would joke, and when he was on a warpath with a small party, he would joke to make his warriors feel good. But outside of war, he was different. He hardly ever noticed anybody, except little children. All the Lakotas liked to dance and sing, but he never joined the dance. And they say nobody ever heard him sing. But everybody liked him, and they would do anything he wanted, or go anywhere he said. This was the mark of a thunder dreamer. They did not seek out recognition, they did not boast, and they often seemed distant from everyday life. Crazy Horse lived by these principles. The Lakota believed that as long as he followed this path, he would be protected. Bullets and arrows could not harm him. He would move through battle untouched, fighting with the strength of the spirits behind him. But his vision carried a warning, one that could not be ignored. In his dream, he had seen himself pulled down by his own people. And that part of the prophecy, it would come true. Crazy Horse was destined to be great. But his greatest threat would not come from the battlefield. It would come from within. After Lighthair's vision, the Lakota wanted to know, was it real? Was he truly protected as the spirits had shown him? There was only one way to find out. Hump, his mentor and war chief, decided to test him in the only way that mattered, in battle. He invited Lighthair to join a raid into Shoshone territory, or as the Lakota called it, Snake Country. But as fate would have it, they didn't run into the Shoshone that day. Instead, they came across another group. It didn't matter who. They were on the warpath, and warriors didn't return home empty-handed. Before the battle, Lighthair prepared himself just as he had seen in his vision. Red lightning streaked down the side of his face, painted in sacred symbols of power. Blue hailstones covered his chest, marking him as untouchable in the storm of battle. A single falcon feather was tied to his hair, pointing downward, just as warriors wore in times of attack. This was no longer just a boy. This was a warrior stepping into his destiny. As the Lakota moved in, they realized they had been spotted. Their enemies, only 4 men, moved quickly, entrenching themselves behind rocks on a high hillside, a perfect defensive position. This was not a fight the Lakota could rush into blindly. The Lakota war party was small, just Lighthair, Hump, and a few others. The men in the hills had the high ground and cover, giving them the advantage. Attacking an entrenched enemy was always dangerous. But this was more than just a raid. This was a test. Hump gave the order to charge. Lighthair didn't hesitate. Armed with both traditional and modern weapons, he embodied the changing times of the Lakota warrior. A 6-shooter hung from his belt, a weapon of the enemy, turned against them. A quiver full of arrows strapped to his waist, a reminder of the traditions that had shaped him. In his right hand he gripped his bow. 2 arrows were held in his left. A 3rd arrow was clenched in his teeth, ready to fire at a moment's notice. He charged up the hill, stepping into his vision. Would the bullets miss him, just as they had in his dream? Would the spirits protect him? This was the moment of truth. Lighthair was in front, leading the charge up the hillside, just as he had seen in his vision. The enemy dug in behind the rocks, waited with rifles ready. As soon as the Lakota came into range, musket balls ripped through the air, whistling past him before he even heard the crack of gunfire. He could feel their force, so close, yet somehow not a single one touched him. Then disaster struck. A bullet found its mark, not in him, but in his horse. The animal collapsed beneath him, sending Lighthair tumbling to the ground. His bow was gone. The chaos of battle surrounded him, the dust thick in the air. This was the moment where most warriors would hesitate, where fear might take over. But Lighthair didn't stop moving. Through the dust, he spotted a loose horse, panicked, charging downhill. Without thinking, he reached out, gripped its mane, and swung himself onto its back in one fluid motion. The horse, wild with fear, carried him straight into the heart of the enemy's stronghold, right where no warrior should ever be alone. He didn't have time to think. He drew his pistol from his belt and fired, forcing one of the men to dive for cover. But the other 3, they all turned their rifles on him. 3 shots rang out, 3 chances to end his life. Yet not a single bullet touched him. For the first time, the Lakota warriors watching from below felt something more than just admiration. This was something different. This was his vision coming to life. Bullets and arrows flew all around him, yet none struck him. Regaining control of his horse, Lighthair turned and galloped back down the hill. He had faced the enemy alone, stood in the center of gunfire, and walked away unharmed. The warriors watching that day would not forget what they had seen. This was more than skill, more than luck. This was Crazy Horse. Lighthair wasn't done yet. Grabbing his bow, he turned and charged up the hill again, this time with Hump at his side. The enemy was still firing, bullets striking the rocks around him, but Lighthair moved like a man with no fear. He pulled back his bow, an arrow slicing through the air, finding its mark in the chest of one of the men. As another turned his rifle toward him, Lighthair drew his pistol and fired, dropping the second man before he could react. With two enemies down, the Lakota warriors seized their moment. They rushed in, their war cries echoing through the hills as they overwhelmed the remaining defenders. But the fight wasn't over yet. Rifles still cracked, bullets still whistled through the air, shattering against the rocks. Lighthair, now on foot, moved swiftly toward the bodies of the men he had killed. This wasn't just about the battle, this was a warrior's duty. Gripping the hair of one fallen enemy, he sliced away the scalp in one smooth motion, a mark of victory, a sign that this fight belonged to the Lakota. As he turned to do the same to the second man, pain exploded through his leg, and he crumpled to the ground. For a moment, the world spun. Had he been hit by an arrow? A stray bullet? No one could say for sure. All he knew was that his leg was wounded, and he could no longer stand. Above him, the battle raged on, his fellow warriors pressing forward, finishing what he had started. But for the first time that day, Lighthair couldn't fight. Forced to hobble down the hill, he made his way toward the rest of the raiding party. When he reached them, they gathered around him, not just out of concern, but out of respect. They had witnessed it all, his fearless charge, his deadly precision, the bullets that had somehow missed him, and the moment when fate had finally caught up. Lighthair had walked into battle a warrior. Now he was something more. The warriors knew what they had just witnessed. Lighthair's actions had turned the tide of battle. He had charged straight into danger, taken out two enemies, and survived gunfire that should have killed him. Because of him, the raid had been a success. They had defeated the enemy and returned with resources and horses for their people. But there was something else they couldn't ignore. Despite being the closest to the enemy, despite charging straight into gunfire, Lighthair had only been injured when he went to take the scalps. Some saw this as a coincidence. Hump and Elder Crazy Horse did not. Lighthair's wound was treated, and after a few days, the war party made their way back to the tribe. That night, as they gathered around the campfire, everyone wanted to hear his story. He was only 17 years old, yet he had fought like a seasoned warrior. But when they asked him to speak, he refused. He did not boast, did not recount his victories. Instead, he simply rose and walked away, retreating to the lodge of his father. This was not the reaction they expected. Later that night, Hump and Elder Crazy Horse met to discuss what they had seen. They knew the meaning of his vision, the prophecy that bullets and arrows could not harm him as long as he walked the path of a thunder dreamer. But now something had become clear. Lighthair had only been wounded when he tried to take scalps. It was a warning. A thunder dreamer must live differently from other warriors. Where others would boast of their victories, he must remain humble. Where others would take scalps as a sign of dominance, he must do the opposite. This was not the way of an ordinary warrior. This was the way of Crazy Horse. What Hump and Elder Crazy Horse had just realized, Lighthair already seemed to understand. While others sought recognition, trophies, and praise, he had remained silent, humble, and withdrawn. That night, he proved something even greater than his skill in battle. He proved wisdom. And soon, his people would follow him not just as a warrior, but as a leader. The morning after the battle, Lighthair awoke to something unexpected. In the center of the camp, a crowd had gathered. Whispers moved through the people as he approached, and standing at the edge, waiting for him, was his father, Elder Crazy Horse. As Lighthair stepped forward, a song began to rise. His father's voice carried through the air, singing an honor song for warriors. One by one, others joined in, Hump, He-Dog, Lone Bear, and the warriors who had fought beside him. This was not an ordinary gathering. This was a moment of recognition. When the song ended, Elder Crazy Horse turned to the people and spoke. He told them of the battle, of how his son had fought with courage, strength, and wisdom beyond his years. And then he said the words that would forever change his son's place in history. It is time for him to take a new name, one of honor, one of his family. With that, Lighthair was no more. From this day forward, he would carry the name Crazy Horse. It was more than just a name, it was a legacy. The name had belonged to his father before him, and his grandfather before that. But names were not simply passed down in Lakota tradition, they had to be earned. And now Lighthair had done just that. But with the passing of the name came another change. His father, Elder Crazy Horse, would no longer carry that title. He took a new name for himself, Worm. It was a name of humility, one that would hold meaning in time. For he would now be remembered not as Crazy Horse, but as Worm, the father of Crazy Horse. From this moment on, Crazy Horse's life would become legend. For a time, he would be given a special leadership shirt, a symbol of his growing status among his people. But even this would be taken away after a complicated love triangle that nearly cost him his life, shot in the face by an angry husband but surviving, only to receive apology horses as a peace offering. He would never seek power, but it would find him nonetheless. Again and again, he proved himself, not just in raids, but in full-scale battles against the U.S. military. At first, even his own people questioned his bravery, dismissing it as the reckless nature of a young warrior. But they were wrong. With each battle, each victory, and each impossible survival, he silenced the doubters. And in 1877, just as his vision had foretold, his greatest threat did not come from his enemies, but from within. While being held back by his own people, Crazy Horse was stabbed to death by a U.S. soldier. His life ended in betrayal, but his name? It would never die.